might just get going. It's my great pleasure to introduce Dr. Aiden Ricketts as our keynote speaker for Praxis 2025. A little bit of background on Aidan. Aidan teaches in the Faculty of Law at Lismore campus. As a legal academic, Aidan specialises in social movements and environmental activism. He is published on protests, activism, police, protesters' liaison, and anti-protest laws. Aidan is also the author of the Activists Handbook, a step-by-step guide to participatory democracy, which is a resource on grassroots activism. A little bit of background also, more background shall I say, Aidan played a significant leadership role at the Bentley blockade in 2014. Thousands of people were mobilised to camp at Bentley, which is near Lismore, in peaceful protest against coal seam gas exploration by the resource company Madagascar. After months of peaceful civil disobedience and under threat of a police force raid threatening to arrest thousands of peaceful protesters, the government withdrew their coal seam gas licences. A major win for the environment and also proving the power of people in non-violent protests. Aidan has 2 master's degrees, both Masters of Laws as well as Master in Education. In 2022, Aidan was awarded his PhD with the University of New England. Please give Aidan a big round of applause as our keynote speaker. Thank you.
Okay, you got me up the back? Okay. All right, well thanks everyone, and lovely to be here amongst you all. Sorry I couldn't have got here early, but I had a bit of a rough sleep and slept in and needed to coffee up. So the theme of my talk really, and I've been making it up as I go along, is pretty much make it up as you go along. So it's really, I'm sort of been thinking, well, you know, what would I talk about to a group of postgraduate students? And I think it's really about your research journey, your life journey, and you know, whether there really is a boundary between you and your research, and if so, how that kind of works. And I'm going to do that, you know, in a way through exploring, you know, just sharing with you my own sort of journey, crooked path, or whatever through the whole thing. And one of the things, and you know, when I was first asked to do this, I thought, well, you know, why me? Because I've always, like most people, well, most people aren't psychopaths. I have, you know, imposter syndrome. Be careful of people who don't feel like imposters. And then I went, oh God, I guess I have actually studied in, you know, postgraduate in most of the major ways, in that I've done the Masters of Education by coursework, the Masters of Law by great big research and thesis. Having been burnt by that, I did the PhD by journal article publication format, thinking, oh, well, that'll be a nice, easier way to do it, and then discovered all of the pitfalls of trying to do that. And of course, I've written my own book, which was also an academic publication, you know, with a private publisher, Z Books in London. And so, you know, I've got to, in a sense, you know, maybe float around and sample this where, sample that where, and see where it's all at. So I sort of think that's obviously, you know, got to be good. Now, not all of you obviously are going on an academic career where research is kind of just this endless lifelong journey, but you never know, you could end up doing that. But in any case, it's really good to think about, you know, who we are and our own journey. And I'm sort of in a way thinking, you know, imagining some sort of Venn diagram you might have between what you think is yourself and what you think is your research, and how much they actually intersect. Because if they don't intersect, it's going to get really boring and a whole lot of work. And if they do intersect, it's going to make you slowly crazy. That's probably what's going to happen, right? So the slightly crazy bit is sort of goes with the turf. And there was something I was going to say at the end, but after talking to some people last night, I decided to say at the beginning, and it's like a really good thing to do at the outset of your research career is go and get some psychological testing and try and find out your neurological type, find out whether you're actually ADHD or autistic or maybe not, because there's a very good chance that most academics are one of those. And it's so many people sort of find this stuff out later. You know, we used to think those things were disorders, so you had to be sort of not functioning in order to have them, but we've now sort of realised a whole lot of people are sort of skipping through life and finding some things difficult but managing to sort of life hack them and get through, and then they find out years later, oh, that's why I was cutting people off while they were talking or missing appointments, you know. And I think it's important, you know, because it's got things to do with your journeys as well. I mean, one thing I've read strongly about ADHD is you can absolutely sail through coursework, but when you sit down to do a dissertation, all of that sitting down and focusing is going to drive you nuts. The other thing, of course, is up by understanding your neurological type, you get to understand what kind of drugs are best for assisting your research, whether you should be using, you know, prescribed stimulants, or whether you should be using sort of, you know, black market psychedelics or marijuana or something. And I might be brave enough to, you know, offer some views on that, but we'll see how we go. So that's the thing about sort of, so that's what I'm sort of wanting you to sort of think about as I talk about my journey. Think about your journey and what it means to engage with your research, how it might change you, or how you might change it, or how you might, you know, really engage who you are, you know, inside, and you might not have fully discovered who you are with your research, and sort of become one in that sort of journey. I think I've done that partly because I sort of maybe didn't have a choice, but you know, my journey to get started, you know, I sort of left high school thinking, am I going to be a lawyer or a teacher, right? And then, you know, I got good enough marks to do law, so oh well, you do the highest thing you can get into at that time, and especially for a working class person in the post-Whitlam era, it was sort of like smashing the barriers getting into law. But then I tried to work in a law firm, and just sort of, I really couldn't do it. I just, and I didn't know I was ADHD, but I think that's what it was, you know. I just really couldn't just do the 8 hours focus in the office. I just felt like I was, you know, I remember I'd have to go and sleep in the park at lunchtime because I was just so stressed. And so I left that and got into activism, actually, which was a lot more realistic. And then activism got me back into academia through the law school, because the law school at Southern Cross is very sort of activist and social justice focused. And then sort of got into academia and went, oh wow, these people don't make you work an 8-hour day non-stop. These people say, right, here's the job, get it done, as long as you don't fuck up, we're not going to worry about it. And I went, right, that's my place. And so in the end, without necessarily prefiguring it, am I going to be a lawyer or a teacher? I'm going to be a law teacher. So again, that's what I mean about, in a way, just letting go of the controls a bit, and then finding yourself in that sort of merging between yourself and your research and what you do. So then that takes you sort of into the next step, you know, and then you go, oh, well, Jesus, I've become an academic. What do I do now? Oh, God, they're pressuring me to do a master's. So what do I do a master's on? And then I remember, well, I remember in law school, I remember learning that corporations were treated as the equivalent of human beings under the law. And I remember always being upset about that, going, corporations, they don't have a body, they don't have a moral faculty, they're only there for profit, they can't suffer imprisonment, they can't suffer torture. Why would they get human rights? I don't know, that's what I was thinking about during the law lecture. Obviously something else going on, so I went, all right, that's always been my obsession, I'll do that. And I think that's right. I was always advised, if you're going to do a dissertation, it's got to be an obsession, because if it's not, it's going to bore you senseless. It's going to be awful. So pick something that's an obsession, and probably by the end it'll be something you don't want to think about anymore. But certainly pick an obsession. So it was an obsession, and so I set myself, that was my first big postgraduate journey, was dissertation, research and thesis as a master's. And it was all about essentially proving the obvious, that corporations don't have a moral faculty, and yet they're given all of the rights of humans under our legal system, which is a terrible thing, and you know, we're suffering from it. That's why we're living in such a in such a sort of a manipulated and sort of psychotic world these days. In fact, I've come to realise since then that corporations were actually the first form of AI. We set up an artificial decision-making structure that, although it employed humans, it had its own sort of structure to employ their intelligence in its own decision-making. You know, so it was a very rudimentary form of AI. Now, of course, corporations can sort of piss off the humans and just make psychopathic decisions using AI in the future, so we'll have to deal with that. So that was the first one, and you know, that journey of the dissertation, as much as I was obsessed with it, it was really, really hard. And I come back to that imposter syndrome thing too. At every juncture, there's always been this sense of, oh, I've got to somehow convince the examiners that I'm for real, you know, that I'm actually doing this. This isn't really what I am, but I've got to get over that hurdle. And I think that's the imposter syndrome, because by the time you get to you think you're kind of faking your way through your dissertation and oh, I've passed the examination. When you get to the end of it, you go, no, that wasn't faking my way through it, that was actually doing it. And I think, you know, that's what you end up learning is, oh, it changed me in the process. You know, at first I wasn't that deep researcher, but at the end I was. So it changed me. And again, that's what I mean about that blurry distinction between you and your research, and how, you know, you might unconsciously choose something you're passionate about, you know, it might transform you as a person and all of that. So that's my experience of that. And then, and what I want to sort of touch on today too, in this little journey is, you know, all those different modes of studying, you know, the research and thesis, again, depending on your neurological type. For ADHD, it's traditionally pretty bad trying to do a great big work that you have to focus on. And one of the funny stories, and yes, let's go into drugs. One of the funny stories, and I recounted it to Thor last night, was, you know, I'd work all week trying to, you know, write it, proof it, footnote it, you know, and write down in there in the left brain. And at the end of the week, oh, God, you know, let's just go back, hit my mates, have a beer, pull out a big joint, and then all of a sudden get stoned and go, oh, and lift up and see the metastructure of the thesis and go, hang on, that shouldn't be chapter 2, that should be chapter 4, and this bit, and I should take that bit out of there and put it there, and this bit's an irrelevant dead end that I don't even need to prove, because really the sense of that's over there, and suddenly, instead of relaxing, I'd be out drawing concept maps all over the place, and my friends would wonder where I'd gone again, you know, oh, he's doing postgraduate research, he's gone mad. So the metastructure, and luckily these metastructural concept maps by Monday morning didn't turn out to be some kind of weird delusion. They were actually quite good because I'd lifted up above the subject matter and could rearrange it. Now, I'm not recommending anybody do any particular thing, I'm just talking about a story. But they actually helped me, at least, go, oh, you know, just look at it from probably the right brain and go, oh yeah, it fits together this way. So the next thing that happened, being a law teacher, and that's what I mean, it's lovely to be amongst education people because I sort of see myself more as a teacher than as a lawyer. I started doing, you know, the graduate certificate in tertiary ed, and then they said, oh, you know, you can turn this into a master's if you just do a few more units. So it was by coursework. And I went, wow, coursework, fantastic. I found that really easy, and there was a little mini thesis in it that was great, a bit of research about threshold concepts I was into at the time. Wonderful area. I don't think I've got time to talk about that. You know, if anybody starts talking about the content of their thesis, it takes another few hours. But anyway, so that was great. And that, again, starts to get me down to this idea of the different styles and whether they suit you. You know, coursework, you know, in my view, is the least dangerous. You know, because it's quantifiable, it's there, you know what you have to do, it's provided for you. It often gives you opportunities to specialise, which undergraduate study doesn't. I think it's, you know, for me, it's kind of the easiest way to do it, but it's not the most adventurous, it's not the most, it doesn't give you the most freedom or fluidity to really explore what you want to explore. But it's certainly a safe way to go. One of the things I found happened is when I did my Masters of Law by Research and Thesis, there was no big obligation career-wise to have a PhD in the law discipline then. But what I got caught by, and this is a salutary lesson, was academic inflation. So I got a Masters by Research and Thesis, which should have been good enough for a law career, but within a few years of the upsurge in coursework masters, it caused an academic inflation in which master's degrees were suddenly, in a sense, devalued. And as much as you tried, you couldn't say, yes, but mine was by research and thesis. They talk to the hand, you need a PhD. So that was really, really frustrating. in a way, to you know, because when I did coursework, I went, oh God, that was a doddle compared to the research and thesis. And then to be sort of told, oh yeah, it looks like, you know, you've just got a master's. That's not what we want. You know, we want a PhD. And it's like, but it was research. No. And so then there was a very long sort of lacuna where it was like, oh my God, you know, I had, you know, senior colleagues saying, well, you're going to need to do a PhD or, you know, you're going to have problems. And I really, because there'd been a lot of suffering in research and thesis, and I was like, I've already done that. I've already had that journey. I've already learnt what I needed to learn by that journey, and I know I don't want to do that journey again. So I really postponed the PhD. So what I did in the meantime is probably the most fun thing I did of all, which is write my own book. And again, getting back to this theme of what's you, what's your research? Yes, although I taught in a law school, you know, that was my job. What my work has always been is protests, activism, non-violent direct action, self-organised community action. And I'd been involved in the forest campaigns in the 1990s for the old growth forests in New South Wales. We quadrupled the size of the national park estate through several years of blockading, including incredible actions like taking over the entire Forestry Commission multi-storey building in a self-styled coup and issuing a People's Commission for the Forest edict to the rest of the state. Things that these days would very quickly get the T word attached to them. But it was before 9/11, so we were able to be a little bit more adventurous, taking over multi-storey buildings. But after that, it was like, okay, I'm an activist and I'm an educator. What do I do? Do I just go into another campaign, just me in another campaign, because campaigns use up all your energy, or do I use the fact I'm an activist and educator to teach 1,000 other people how to be activists? So that's when I decided to write the Activists Handbook. Okay, I'll write a book about being an activist and then 1,000 other people can be activists. And that was, for me, a pretty joyful experience. But again, what are the pitfalls? You know, what are the pitfalls of writing your own book? The joys of writing your own book, to me, were many. You've got so much more control than you do with journal articles, so much more control than you do with research and thesis. You know, when you're writing a formal dissertation, you're so caught in that academic proofing where you can't use a term without defining it and you can't have an assumption that you can't prove. And my experience of research and dissertation was you set out to argue this much that you're passionate about, and with your supervisors you retreat and you retreat and you retreat to what's provable until you feel like you're writing a dissertation in the bleeding obvious, because at least you can prove the bleeding obvious. And when you write a book, you've got this incredible liberty as an author to say, look, you're just choosing to read my book, so here's a few assumptions at the beginning of the book. If you accept these, let's go on, and if you don't bother about it. And you don't have to reference them, prove them, and rest them on all of the literature. You can actually just take your reader on a consensual journey with you. And I think that's the really liberating thing about a book, is, you know, you just set out your sort of framework ideas in the beginning, and then you say, all right, well, if you're in for this journey, let's go. And you only have to do as much proofing as you want to do. You only have to do as much referencing as you have to do. And my experience, I was working with Z Books in London, and there's another story how it ended up being London, but they've already invested in you. They want you to succeed. They want you to get the book out on time. They're not like a journal editor who, you know, seems to be just holding sticks out and trying to trip you up along the way. And there's another horrible thing about journals. You know, you write for a journal, you're sort of punished by the editor and, you know, limited by the examiners, you know, all that frustrating process, and then you give your copyright away to a journal that then locks it in a cabinet and doesn't let anybody read it unless they pay them. And when you write your own book, you get royalties, you get a book, you get treated as an author, you get to go to writers' festivals and be treated as lesser than fiction writers, because fiction writers are the true gods, people who write in the real world, yeah. But anyway, it's lots of fun. So I really enjoyed the book writing, and it was also, again, you know, a beautiful sort of bringing together of self and research, in the sense of, like I said before, I'm an activist and an educator. Campaigns are exhausting. What would be better for me and what would be better for the world would be if I used all that experience in a successful campaign to teach other people how to have successful campaigns, and they could do it. And I wouldn't have to get so exhausted, and I could have a more relaxing life, just as a consultant to campaigns. Let's see how that goes. Okay, so now one of the odd things, so you pitch this book, and all of the publishing houses in Australia go, that's very, very good, we like that, and we can see you've got a master's and you know what you're talking about, you know, we'd be very happy to publish that. Well, we just don't think it'd sell enough in Australia, too small a market. Oh, okay, so boom, go over to apply with Z Books in London, which is sort of, you know, a left-leaning sort of publishing house with a global reach, and yeah, we'll take it, which was a big breakthrough. So then I write this book, it gets published internationally, looks great on your CV. But strangely enough, 90% of the sales happen in Australia. And you go, oh, you silly people, you missed this one out. Because actually what happened, and it was very fortunate, but you're never in control of the timing, is because I thought, well, who's going to buy this book? I mean, people who are activists think they already know it, so they're not going to buy it. And people who don't think they're activists aren't going to buy it, so who the hell is going to buy it? Very, very few people. But it just happened to come out in 2012 at the dawn of the entire Lock the Gate, anti-fracking, coal mining, anti-mining campaigns right across Australia when fracking was rolling out, and Lock the Gate was setting up new action groups all over the country, and all of a sudden this sort of became like the Bible for use. And I was able to market it and give donations to Lock the Gate and other groups and work with different groups. So that was great. So I thought, this is great. I just get to write the book, teach other people how to do activism, be a consultant in particular campaigns, and everything will be, life will be a bit more relaxing because campaigns are exhausting. Of course, what happened? Sauron comes to scour the Shire of the Northern Rivers. The fracking actually comes to the Northern Rivers and they want to destroy the Northern Rivers. And my friends say, hey, you're in. And I'm like, okay, well, look, I'll help, I'll do this, I'll do that. And I remember the moment that I felt a campaign coming on. There I was trying to be the educator, there, trying to be the facilitator, trying to be the consultant. And then I remember this terrible kind of shiver go through my body, like, those people who are sort of channeling spirits or something. And it's like, oh my God, I can feel another campaign coming on. And it did. It comes on, and when a campaign comes on, it completely takes you away. So there's another part of the story, right? So you're an academic and you're supposed to be a researcher and you're supposed to be doing your job, but you're not. You're running off, spending most of your time at the Bentley Blockade and doing all that. So how do you make all that work? Well, that's where it comes in handy to say that my area of academic expertise is social movements and activism and protest, so that you can begin to explain to your employer that, oh, well, I'm sort of doing my research, I guess, by doing this. Now, that wasn't front of mind. That wasn't a pre-existing strategy. Like I could come here and pretend and say, oh, yes, I had all this worked out in advance. Absolutely not. This was just a mixed up person sort of wandering through life trying to make ends meet that weren't meeting, and eventually they were. So in a way it was like, again, and this is what I'm really encouraging, this is sort of my message, is to try and look at your career, yourself in all of its aspects, your outer self, your inner self, your shadow, everything, and your research, and just work out how they all sort of interact. What's the Venn diagram of your life around all this, and how can you make that Venn diagram kind of work together as much as possible, rather than being, this is really my life over here, but I've got to do this dissertation over here, and I've got to have this job over here. How can you bring it all together? How am I going for time?
We're almost out of time.
Okay.
So
yeah, no, that's...
We were hoping to open it out to Q&A.
Okay, all right, well, I'll wrap it up. I'll move it along. I just wanted to know that. So that was that journey. So then, let's get to the PhD quickly. Okay, don't want to do a dissertation. I've done that. Already written a book. Have to do publications for the academic career. I've already worked to the point where, okay, my specialty is activism, protest and all that, so being at the protest is it. So I was going to write the article's all about the Bentley blockade. So that's when I went, journal article format, that's the way to go. Now, journal article format, it sounds really attractive. Like, this is going to be so much better than a dissertation. You're going to get your publications out, and then all you have to do is string them all together and say how they're coherent. Now, that was where there's two pitfalls to the journal article publication. One is that each journal article's going in a journal and it has to speak for itself. So unlike a dissertation, you can't just say, as I said in chapter 2, as I said in chapter 3, you keep having to repeat yourself, and it starts taking up much of your article to get to the point where you say the new bit, and that can be annoying to the editors. The other really difficult thing for me is I'd gone multidisciplinary, so suddenly I was doing something in an economics journal, something in a history journal, something in a sociology journal, and only a few in law journals, and suddenly there was, all these new protocols, all these new things. Now, legal scholars don't think about methodology, right? Other scholars look at legal scholars and say, oh yes, you have doctrinal research. And we go, oh, is that what we do? We don't think about it. And suddenly I had to think about it. And this is another example of making it up as you go along. I was actually sitting there, after having done all this stuff, sitting there in a PhD flicking through the first time I'd ever read a methodology book, going, well, where do I fit in here? And then I found this thing called embedded participatory research. This thing where you actually go out in the community and you do shit, and then you come back and write about it. And I went, there I am, that's what I'm doing. And it wasn't like, oh, I'm going to use this research methodology. It was like, fuck, where's one that actually describes what I actually go and do? So I did that. But then the next big struggle with the journal article format is this, well, what's the common element in all this? And at the end, and this gets back to my theme of, where's the intersection between you and your research? At the end I went, this is just a bunch of stuff I've written. It doesn't actually necessarily have a unifying theme except that I wrote it. And that's where I had to write the exegesis, and that was the really hard bit. And this is the scary bit of like, how am I going to really work that together? So back on that theme of what sort of substances you might use to help you do that, you could try microdosing mushrooms, you could try Ritalin, you could try all sorts of things. So let's just say that might have happened. And you go, oh, wow, everything is connected. Wow, look at that. And you manage to sort of articulate, but in a sense, is that right? Yeah, the only connection between it was me. And I had to sort of explore down into that. Anyway, so that leads to that journal article format. All right, so I should finish up. So that's the kind of, that's the story of how messy it can be. You can discover who you are as a researcher late in the piece, you can make it all up as you go along, but I think that, the real theme is to really sort of invest in a sense, is your own psychological integrity somewhere in that process, and try and wrap your career and wrap your research and wrap your methodology around you, rather than having it be this thing in the outside world you're having to kind of live up to.
Fantastic. Awesome. Thank you so much, Aidan. Excellent. Very inspiring. Comments, questions? We're running a bit over time, but I thought students might like to contribute a comment or question to Aidan. Ravi, do you want to meet me halfway up the stairs? Thanks. Can you help me out? Thanks.
Thank you very much for your very insightful session. You said something regarding merging oneself with the research that he is doing. Merging yourself with the research that you are doing. Mm. So what would be the process to understand what you are most passionate about when you are doing the research, in order to choose the particular thing that you'd be able to integrate it with in the future, and how would we be able to embrace the uncertainty in the process?
Well, uncertainty, now you're talking my language. Uncertainty is, there's more uncertainty in the world than there is certainty. Actually, most of us just actually suffer from an addiction to certainty. So uncertainty is probably, always the place to lean into. I think the way to, what we're talking about is finding your passion, and what gets in the way of finding your passion, I think, is all of your limited views of what your employer wants, what your career demands, what will make the most money, what will get you employed. And whilst those obviously are all relevant constraints, you want to be careful, because if you go in a direction that doesn't recognise your passion, you'll end up in the career that doesn't recognise your passion. You'll end up in the place. And so it can be, you know, a very good investment in yourself early on to really know what your passion is and go for that, and, you know, have the courage, I guess, you know, to believe that you're going to end up in the place you need to end up by following your passion, rather than thinking, oh, like, I have to make all these compromises and end up over there.
That's right. We've got another question here, Thor, and we might wrap it up after Thor's.
Thank you so much for that a deep, reflective presentation. I really appreciate that. I'm curious to know, with that journey, it was very personal for you. Did you have any help in that? Was there, did you seek any help, or was there anyone next to you that was supporting you, that helped you along this journey? I'm curious.
Along the way, well, yes. I mean, I said last night, I mean, the supervisors I had weren't monsters, so I was lucky. I mean, I consider examiners and referees to be more capable of being monsters, but they're not always either. Sometimes they're helpful too, if they're good ones. So yeah, my supervisors were fine. My colleagues, I mean, I think you know, I've got to say the Southern Cross Law School, it was just the most wonderful bunch of colleagues, a very social justice oriented school. And I think I was saying to someone last night that, you know, as radical as I've been out in the community with the campaigns, I've always found, just at least myself, that SCU's had my back. So I think that, to me, was one of the biggest things, to be able to just have the freedom to just to be who I am and do what I'm doing politically, no holds barred, but the university to still see that within the frame of academic freedom. And you know, that's something I'm really genuinely grateful to SCU for.
Okay, we might wrap it up there. Let's give Aidan a big warm... thank you so much.